I never thought a footnote would change the course of human history. That is not a metaphor. There was an actual footnote. Page 47 of my doctoral dissertation, buried beneath a citation about phonological drift in extinct morphological systems. It read, "Surface inscription fragments recovered from Kepler 442b survey, 2327, suggest possible Proto-Velthic cognate relationship. Further study warranted." Nobody followed up. Nobody ever follows up on footnotes. My name is Dr. Mara Osei. I am a xenolinguist, which means I study languages that nobody speaks anymore. Dead tongues. Extinct grammars. The fossilized remains of communication left behind by civilizations that stopped existing long before anyone thought to ask why. Most people find this either deeply fascinating or deeply useless. There is rarely a middle position. I had been assigned to the human diplomatic attachment at the conclave of Velcathra because our actual diplomatic team needed someone who could handle alien script in real time, and I was the only xenolinguist within 3-star systems who had current clearance. My colleagues on the attachment were Ambassador Reyes, a careful and politically gifted man who had spent 30 years not starting wars, and Lieutenant Chen, who was there to keep us both alive and spent most of her time looking quietly exhausted. The conclave was a cathedral station. That is the only way I know how to describe it. It orbited a dying star, and whoever built it had decided that this slow, ancient light was exactly the right backdrop for the business of spiritual and political authority. The Vethri priestly caste ran it. They were tall, 7-limbed, wrapped in robes that produced a faint harmonic sound when they moved, and they regarded humanity the way a university library regards a student who has wandered into the wrong section, patient, tolerant, gently certain we had no business being there. Humanity had been in galactic contact for 80 years. In galactic terms, this made us roughly equivalent to a child who had just learned to read and was very excited about it. We were on probationary status at the conclave, which meant we could observe sessions but not vote, speak when addressed but not initiate, and generally exist in a way that caused the minimum possible disruption to proceedings that had been running, in some form, for longer than our written history. Ambassador Reyes took this seriously. He prepared for every session with the focus of a man who understood that he was representing 8 billion people and a species still trying to prove it deserved a seat at the table. Lieutenant Chen took it seriously in a different way, which mostly involved knowing where every exit was. I took photographs of the walls. The station was covered in inscriptions, carvings, inlays, raised text in at least a dozen scripts running along archways and door frames, and the edges of every surface that held still long enough. The Vethri walked past all of it without looking. It was furniture to them. Background. The way people stop seeing the wallpaper in their own home. I could not stop looking. On the second day, while Reyes prepared his remarks for the opening session and Chen ran her quiet security checks, I walked the corridor outside our quarters with my tablet and photographed everything. I was not looking for anything specific. That is the honest truth. I was doing what I always do when confronted with inscriptions I do not recognize. Recording first, thinking second, sleeping sometime after that. The script was not one I knew, but the shape of it was familiar in a way that sat in the back of my skull and hummed quietly. The curves, the way certain symbols clustered at the end of phrases, a specific kind of repetition in what appeared to be formal or ceremonial passages. I had seen this before, not this script exactly, but its bones, its deep structural grammar, the way it held words together. I went back to my quarters and opened my dissertation files. I had not looked at them in 2 years. The Kepler 442b survey data was in a subfolder labeled Appendix C, Supporting Materials, which is where research goes when it is important, but not important enough to make anyone care. I pulled up the inscription photographs from the survey team. 43 images of carved stone on a dead world, wind erosion, partial fragments. I had spent 3 years reconstructing what they might have sounded like. I sat with both sets of images for a long time. The root morphology was the same. Not similar, not parallel, the same. The station's inscriptions were a developed, liturgically refined version of the language fossilized in the ruins of a dead planet that humanity had cataloged, sampled, filmed, and filed under no resources of interest. I wrote a note in my tablet. Then I went to the session. The main chamber of the conclave was enormous, in a way that made enormousness feel like a spiritual position. The ceiling was somewhere far above us, lost in designed shadow. The walls carried more inscriptions. The other species present, I counted 7 distinct delegations, sat or stood, or arranged themselves according to their particular biology in a wide arc facing the central dais. Grand Priest Vorshai opened the session. He was ancient. That is the only word. His robes moved with that low harmonic sound, and when he spoke, his voice had a quality that made the air feel more formal. He delivered the ritual invocation in High Vethri. Our translator drone rendered it in flat, careful English. I was listening, but I was also looking at the archway inscription directly above the dais, cross-referencing it in real time against the patterns I had spent the morning studying. I was not planning to speak. I want to be very clear about that. I was reconstructing. In my head, the way I always do, I was running the phonological patterns, matching the root structures, building toward a probable ancient pronunciation of the liturgical phrase carved into the stone. It is an automatic process for me. My brain does it the way other people hum songs without realizing. I murmured the phrase under my breath. Just the opening line. The reconstruction. What the inscription probably sounded like before 1,000 years of liturgical drift changed the vowel sounds and softened the consonants. The silence that followed was total. Not a gradual quiet, not the room settling. A sudden, complete, absolute absence of sound, as though the air itself had stopped moving and was waiting to find out what happened next. I looked up from my tablet. Every Vethri in the chamber was looking at me. Vorshai had stopped speaking mid-syllable. He stood on the dais with his 7 limbs perfectly still, and his eyes, large, pale, structured differently from human eyes, were fixed on my face with an expression I could not immediately read. Ambassador Reyes, sitting beside me, did not move a single muscle. I could feel him not moving. It was a very loud kind of stillness. Vorshai descended from the dais, not quickly, with the careful deliberateness of something very old that has learned not to move faster than it needs to. He crossed the chamber floor toward me, and the other Vethri moved slightly back as he passed, the way water moves around a stone. He stopped in front of me. He was trembling. It was subtle. A faint, rhythmic motion in his outer limbs that he was not bothering to control. I had never seen a Vethri tremble. I had been told by every briefing document that the Vethri priestly caste did not display strong emotion in formal settings. Grand Priest Vorshai was the spiritual authority over dozens of species and centuries of continuous religious tradition. He was standing in front of me, trembling, in front of everyone. The translator drone was struggling. I could hear it producing fragments. The first tongue, cannot be spoken, baya, and then static, because the drone had not been programmed for a situation where the Grand Priest was talking about something that was not supposed to exist. I made a decision. I make most of my decisions the same way, by deciding that honesty is simpler than the alternative. I told him who I was, a linguist, a researcher. I had found ruins on a dead planet 12 years ago, and spent 3 years reconstructing the language carved into them. I had recognized the root structure in the station's inscriptions. I had been reading the archway text aloud in my own reconstruction. I had not intended to disrupt the session. I had not intended anything in particular. The chamber had divided while I was talking. I could see it happening. On the left side of the dais, a group of younger priests were drawing together, with the tight, charged energy of people who have decided something requires a response. On the right, an older cluster stood very still, watching Vorshai with careful, waiting eyes. Vorshai held up one limb. Both groups went still. Then, slowly, haltingly, constructing each word with visible effort, he spoke to me in the ancient language. Not High Vethri, not the modern liturgical form, the old one, the one I had reconstructed from ruins on a dead world. He asked me if I knew what I had said. I ran it back. The phrase I had murmured. I had been so focused on the phonological reconstruction that I had not paused to translate the actual content. I did it now, standing in front of the most important religious figure in this part of the galaxy, with my tablet in my hand and Ambassador Reyes sitting 10 feet away, probably considering retirement. The translation came out clearly. I had said, "The long silence ends. The Makers return through unexpected flesh." It was the opening line of the archway inscription. A dedication, probably. Or an invocation. I had been reading it like a grammar exercise. It had not occurred to me to ask what it meant in context. I told him this honestly. I explained that I had been focused on the phonology, not the semantics. That I had not known what I was saying, precisely. That I was sorry for the disruption. He looked at me for a very long time. Then I showed him my research. I carry my full dissertation archive on my tablet. My colleagues find this slightly alarming. I find it practical. I pulled up the Kepler 442b survey files, the photographs, the excavation records, the inscription fragments, the painstaking reconstruction notes, the appendices full of phonological charts that had put 11 readers to sleep in 2331. I turned the tablet toward Vorshai. He looked at the images of the dead world, the carved stones, the ruins worn down by wind and time. He was very still for a long time, and then something happened in his expression that I do not have precise words for. It was the way something old and closed very slowly opens. Not dramatically, not with any noise. Just a quiet, fundamental change, like watching a door that has been sealed for centuries finally move. He told me what the Vethri believed about their creators, the Velkath, that they had departed the galaxy in an act of transcendence, that their homeworld's location had been sacred knowledge, passed down through generations, and then lost. That the first tongue, the language I had spent 3 years reconstructing from ruins on a dead planet, survived only in liturgy, its original pronunciation forgotten over so many centuries that no living being knew what it had actually sounded like. Until a human linguist wrote a footnote that nobody read. I told him that we had 40 hours of surface footage from the survey mission. Video, audio, full geological and atmospheric documentation. Everything a thorough survey team records about an uninhabited, geologically stable world with no resources of interest. I told him we had walked across it for 3 days. He was quiet for a long moment after that. Then the junior priest on the left side of the chamber moved forward and spoke in rapid high Vethri. The translator drone caught enough of it. He was invoking something called the right of containment. He was arguing that I had accessed sacred knowledge that should not exist in an outsider's possession. He was using words the translator rendered as sealed and protected and unauthorized. He was looking at me the way people look at problems they want to solve, by making the problem go away. Vorshai turned toward him and spoke 4 words in the ancient language. I translated them before I thought about whether I should. I said them aloud, into the chamber, clearly, because that is simply the way I am built. We do not cage the tide. The junior priest went quiet. Ambassador Reyes looked at me with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was not quite gratitude, and not quite horror. It was the expression of a man who has just watched a situation resolve itself in a way he never could have planned, and is not entirely sure whether to be relieved. 3 weeks later, a formal Vethri delegation arrived at the Human Diplomatic Corps offices, requesting access to the Kepler 442b survey archives. There were 8 of them. They brought gifts. They were very polite. Our diplomatic corps spent 2 weeks trying to understand the full political weight of what they were agreeing to. I spent that time writing a second paper. The footnote in this one was considerably more detailed. I still think about what Vorshai asked me, near the end of our conversation in the chamber. He asked whether I had not felt something, walking on the homeworld of his creators. Whether I had not sensed the weight of it. I told him the truth. I had not known what it was yet. That is the most human answer I have ever given. We walked across the sacred for 3 days, took careful notes, filed it alphabetically, and went home for dinner. Not because we are careless, because we are relentlessly, unstoppably, almost embarrassingly curious about everything, and we document it all, and sometimes the thing we documented turns out to matter in ways we did not understand at the time. The ruins are still there, the wind still moves across them. Somewhere in our archive, 40 hours of footage sit in a folder with a very boring label. The long silence ends. The makers return through unexpected flesh. I was reading a grammar exercise. Sometimes that is enough.